Australian politics is having an identity crisis.
I may be a citizen by descent of New Zealand. Needless to say, I was shocked to receive this information. Neither I nor my parents have ever had any reason to believe that I may be a citizen of any other country.
Barnaby Joyce is now one of 7 members of Parliament who've been caught unawares about their dual citizenship status. Larissa Waters was born in Canada but grew up in Australia and didn't know she was still considered Canadian. Matt Canavan says his mother signed him up for Italian citizenship without his knowledge. And Nick Xenophon found out less than a fortnight ago that he's a British overseas citizen.
Man ironie دیگه نیستم.
That is, I'm not an Iranian citizen, and I like to say, then ime Elenas Kyprosipikos.
Which is, I'm not a Greek or Cypriot citizen.
That's all we have to say to you. Thank you.
We're feeling much more Aussie than our colleagues today.
Section 44 of the Constitution prevents anyone from running for Parliament if they're a citizen of another country, or if they're entitled to the same rights as a citizen or subject of another country. The law is 116 years old. The Australian Electoral Commission's Guide for Political Candidates clearly says you cannot nominate if you're disqualified by Section 44 of the Constitution. Some of the politicians caught up in this crisis say they've never had a reason to question their nationality. The matter for 5 of them is now before the High Court, and it will determine if they can stay in their jobs. The decision could change the fate of the 45th Parliament, because the coalition government holds a 1-seat majority, and one of those seats is held by the Deputy Prime Minister, Barnaby Joyce. Australia promotes itself as a great multicultural nation.
'Cause we are one, but we are many, and from all the lands on earth we come.
The latest census data shows that 49% of Australians were either born overseas or have a parent who was born outside the country. If the law stays the same, it could rule out many of them from ever running for office. Changing it would require a referendum. But for now, political representation in 21st century Australia will continue to be determined by a century-old clause. Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, I'm joined now by the independent South Australian senator who's found himself caught up in this mess. It's Nick Xenophon in Melbourne. Good to have you on the program. So you're not among the 5 in the eye of the storm at the moment, but you are listed and you're under scrutiny. Now, help me understand this. You renounced your Greek Cypriot citizenship and then, oops, you found out you're also a British citizen. How did that happen?
Well, firstly, I will be in the eye of the storm. My understanding is that when the Parliament resumes in about 10 days' time, there will be a motion of the Senate, of the Australian Senate, to refer me off to the High Court, along with Fiona Nash, Senator Nash, who's a cabinet minister in the coalition government. So my father is from Cyprus, my mother's from Greece. Before the 2007 election, I undertook the usual steps of renunciation, even though I've never had citizenship of Greece or Cyprus, never wanted to either. But it seems that because my father migrated to Australia in 1951 when Cyprus was still a British colony, and the irony is he migrated to Australia so he could get away from British rule, there's a very peculiar, a rare peculiarity that basically says my father has given me British colonial citizenship, which is a kind of 3rd or 4th class citizenship. The irony is that anyone in Cyprus who was in Cyprus at the time of independence in 1960 automatically lost that British colonial status.
So as things stand, you're under scrutiny. This has caused big trouble in Parliament. Parliament is almost paralysed as a result of this. What are you going to do? Are you going to fight it or are you going to resign?
No, I'm not resigning, because I've got very good legal advice that says that I should be fine when it goes to the High Court. I won't, of course, preempt anything that the High Court of Australia, the highest court of the land, will be doing on this. They're sitting as a court of disputed returns. It's an issue that I'm taking legal advice, and to borrow from that British phrase, I'm going to keep calm and carry on.
You see, your loyalties are under scrutiny now when you said that. Now, seriously, do you believe that the law needs to be changed? Does it need to be changed? Is this a silly old law that needs to go away?
Well, this is part of the Constitution of Australia, and the Constitution has only been changed a handful of times since 1901. It's a 116-year-old document, and the position is this: if the Constitution needs to be changed, it needs to be put to the people of Australia at a referendum. There are 6 states here, and a majority of people in a majority of states have to agree to support a change to the Constitution. I think at this stage we need to see what the High Court will determine. This will actually be the case on the interpretation of Section 44. The last major case was 25 years ago, and I think that the law on this will evolve since that time. And in my case, you say I'm under scrutiny. Well, as soon as I found out from the UK Home Office when I made inquiries, because I had media inquiries, I put my hand up and said, let's get on with it. Send me to the High Court so we can work out what's going on. But it's pretty crazy because I know my loyalties aren't to any other country in the world other than Australia, and I never want to have and never have had any other form of citizenship than Australian citizenship. So I know where I stand and how I feel about my country, but it's up to the wise women and men on the High Court to sort out what my fate will be.
Nick Xenophon, good to talk to you. Thanks so much. Let's bring in 2 new guests now to debate the ramifications of this situation. From Sydney, we're joined by David Oldfield. He's a former Member of Parliament and co-founder of the right-wing One Nation Party. And replacing Nick in Melbourne is Jack Lattimore, a journalist who writes for Indigenous X and The Guardian. As Nick said, this is the Constitution. It's very difficult to change a Constitution. It's not any old law. With that in mind, despite all of that, David Oldfield, this was written 117 years ago. Times have changed. Section 44 is causing trouble and Parliament's essentially paralysed. Is it time to change the Constitution, David?
Well, I don't see really why the Constitution needs to be changed. I mean, I can understand why it was changed in the past. That makes sense. But on this occasion, the Australian Constitution requires that people do not have loyalty to another country. Now, we've got some issues with that because we find some people apparently have loyalty without actually knowing that they have it, and clearly that's a nonsense. But if you're a person who has been born in a country other than Australia and you have failed to renounce the citizenship of that country, well, you know, that's a matter where there is the question of where your loyalties lie. That's what the Constitution predicted and how it was enacted, and that makes sense. By the same token, if you're somebody like Barnaby Joyce and you are a citizen of another country just by virtue of the fact that your father was born there and you're unaware of it, well, of course, that's ridiculous.
So, David, yes, you have the Deputy Prime Minister. He's not been sent as some sort of Manchurian candidate by New Zealand, to conduct a coup d'etat, right? He didn't know. Yet the implications of this are as if somebody was almost a spy or somebody was working for a foreign government. Given that the government could fall, the Prime Minister could lose his job. With all of that in mind, are people making too much of a big deal of this, David?
Well, look, I think so, absolutely. And look, the reality is that if the Prime Minister fell, so to speak, the Deputy Prime Minister wouldn't become the Prime Minister. Barnaby Joyce is a member of the National Party. They're a coalition partner. If something happened to our current Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, who is in theory a New Zealand citizen, simply wouldn't become the Prime Minister. It would be another person from the current Prime Minister's party. But all of that aside, there's no question that there's a Manchurian candidate taking place here. It's just one of those unfortunate silly things where New Zealand has a law that impacts a person who is not even aware of it. I mean, Barnaby Joyce is a 5th generation Australian from Tamworth, where both his mother and his grandmother were born. So, it's a silly situation. Do we need to change the Constitution to correct that? What we really need to find out is what the High Court ultimately deems as appropriate. If the High Court comes back and says that Barnaby Joyce is a citizen of New Zealand because his father was born there and because New Zealand say he is, well, then I would suggest we need to change the Constitution. If, on the other hand, they come back and say that Barnaby Joyce is not a citizen of New Zealand, he was unaware of it, and it is a matter for New Zealand rather than Australia, well, the Constitution is fine as it is.
Jack, does that sound reasonable to you?
Yeah, I think everyone's waiting to find out now what the High Court comes up with in October. It really comes down to what the interpretation of the law, whether it's the rule of law, the letter of the law, or the spirit of the law. From where I sit and what I'm hearing through the work that we do, a lot of people are having a bit of a laugh about this, at the hypocrisy of it. Not so long ago, the Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull was espousing that he abided by the rule of law. He was trying to show strong leadership. This was his slogan, the rule of law. Now we find ourselves in a position where he is somewhat urging that the spirit of the law be followed in these matters that jeopardise some of the members of his party.
And so how do you think this is going to turn out? And how do you think it's going to evolve as we get to that crucial
also,
date?
Imran,
Okay, come in, David, and then we'll go back to Jack. Come in, David.
Imran, I was just saying that, interestingly, there's no real excuse for any of this, especially for people who were born overseas, as opposed to Barnaby Joyce's situation, the Deputy Prime Minister. There's no real excuse because my recollection of how this came down is that it first occurred in a practical sense about 20 years ago when a lady named Heather Hill was excluded from being elected because after the election, when she was supposed to go into the Senate, this is back in 1998, it was found that she was actually still a citizen of the UK. Now, as far as I'm aware, she was the first person that ever had that happen. It was found she was a dual citizen and she was excluded from taking up her seat in the Senate, and somebody else had to take her place. So at least in the last 20 years, we've known this is an issue. At the time when that happened, it was suggested that there were as many as 50 people in the Parliament who may have actually been in the same position as her, but nothing was ever done about those people. All of a sudden, 20 years later, somebody's doing something about it.
Okay, Jack, I want you to have a listen to Julie Bishop, the Australian Minister for Foreign Affairs, talking about New Zealand, and this has been an extraordinary spat now with the neighbours. Let's have a little listen and I'll ask you a question off the back of that.
Bill Shorten has sought to use a foreign political party to raise serious allegations in a foreign parliament designed to undermine confidence in the Australian government. Bill Shorten has serious questions to answer. This is highly unethical at least, but more importantly puts at risk the relationship between the Australian government and the New Zealand government.
Okay, so Jack, it now influences foreign relations, especially relations with the neighbour, New Zealand. This sounds bizarre in many ways. So the allegations that a Labour MP had somehow sort of colluded with the Kiwis next door, has Australian politics lost its mind?
Yes, it has lost the mind has gone since 2010. You know, anyone following it has seen prime ministers come and go and be replaced within their party, you know, quite frequently. In this case, Julie Bishop and the party that she represents, the Liberal Party, it's classic deflection. Those allegations are fairly serious, and they've been shrugged off essentially by the Labor Party, the opposition. And again, in today's paper, the Liberals were out attempting to smear the opposition leader, Bill Shorten, with being a socialist, which is absolutely absurd. He is considered by many to be in the right wing of the Labor Party. But yes, you know, to answer your question, in general, Australian politics is on an uneven keel at the moment.
And what's going to happen as we get to the 10th of October, Jack?
I think a reasonable and rational approach will be taken by the High Court. Now, whether I agree with that or not is beside the point. I think that they, although they'll look at each of these cases individually and look at the merits of the circumstances involved, I would say, you know, with the likes of Barnaby Joyce, he'll maintain his position. There might be a question over Malcolm Roberts, the One Nation senator. And there may be a question, well, there already, Scott Ludlam has gone. And, you know, they're saying that there might be a question over Joyce, but, you know, it's still fairly unclear. After October, I think we'll just basically be in the same position as we're at the moment. We won't go toward an election, I don't think. Some people are tipping a later by-elections in late 2017, 2018. I can't see that happening, but yeah, just the status quo will be maintained, I would say.
Okay, Jack Lattimore, David Oldfield, and earlier Nick Xenophon. Good to have all of you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us.